everybody. Hey, this is Todd McFarlane. Just want to welcome everybody to the virtual San Diego panel here. Wish we could be in person. Obviously, everybody does. Everybody would like to be there. But since we don't, we're just going to do the next best thing, and we're going to still basically have a good chat and a good time with you. This is where I generally come in and do my panel and talk to you about all things Todd. But we're having a bit of a fun year this year with releasing a couple of sort of new books, big projects. And I wanted to, instead of going solo this time around, want to bring in a couple of my friends and we can talk about some of the process of how you actually go about putting comic books out and why and the reasoning and the rationale behind it. Not Spawn specific, although we'll get into some of that conversation, but just comics in general, just so that if any of you out there sort of have a hint of making this a career, or some of you young people don't know you want to make it a career yet, maybe we might say something that's a little bit different. So with that, as you guys can see, I've got my friend over here, Mr. J. Scott Campbell. So if everybody could give him a round of applause, we'll bring him in. So, hey, good to see you, Scott. Thanks for
good to see you, Todd.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no, and so I see you sitting by the old classic spinner rack, which is.
I do have all these spinner racks,
Yeah,
and it's very, it's my own variants in there, which usually would not be the case. I'm such a bad.
Are all those your covers?
They are, because I've got a box of my absolute childhood favorites in the garage that I have to like fight my way to, which is what's supposed to be on here. But I don't want it to be empty, so I just went to what I had, which happened to be some variant covers I've done with there's some DC and Marvel stuff on there, and I think I should have a Spawn one on there. I'm not sure where it is at the moment, but I had a 300 up there, and I need my new Spawn universe ones to populate there.
So as most of you know, Scott, otherwise, as you guys probably know, J. Scott Campbell is one of the preeminent cover artists in our industry right now, and I'm sure any of you that have collected comic books, whether you've done it knowingly or unknowingly, probably have many samples of his artwork that are out there. He's done stuff obviously for Marvel and DC. He's been kind enough to do some stuff for me, but his roots go all the way back to the beginning of Image comic books as a whole. So Scott, the reason I wanted you to come on board today for this conversation, just talking about comic books as a whole, is that there's a couple things that are important. One is sort of creating characters that have meaningful stories that people will, sort of adhere to and like. Some of it, they just like the artist or they like the writer or whatever it is. All the same things you and I did when we were kids. But there's this saying that your mom and my mom taught us, don't judge a book by its cover. And the answer is, of course we do. Not only
Right.
in life, with everything, with the way people dress and talk and everything else, and what kind of occupation and where they come from and what team they root for, everything, what politics and religions they have. We do it. We judge books by your cover. But we actually judge books, period, by their cover. And so one of the things that all companies need to do, whether it's Image or anybody else, is they need to get that. To me, the reason the cover is so important is when you walk into a store, or you're going even on the website, but more importantly in a store, and you've got to see a book, you have to try and get that moment where you can catch their attention, right?
Absolutely.
And that becomes, well, what do you put on that cover at that time? So I mean, given that you're one of the best in the industry, I wanted to pick your brain. I don't know if I've even asked this as many times on the phone. Is like, what's your thought process when you're trying to compose something?
That's a great question. I think it's evolved over time. I think the way I would maybe approach a cover, when I first started doing this, maybe in the Image days, is very different than I would approach it even now, because that was before we had phones and before we had the phones with the screens on them. That was before all that. And I think back then I was very inspired by movie posters, and movie posters would often cram a ton of imagery on the covers or the posters themselves. I mean, sometimes the movie was almost being told in montage form. And some of my early covers, I used to try to mimic movie posters and that sort of thing. And I still from time to time will use that approach, that sort of montage approach with multiple floating heads and bodies. Usually you get a lot of flexibility there because you can have a full figure in front of a floating head, and it doesn't matter that they're not in the real space because you're kind of like, it's a montage. In more recent years, I think I've realized the importance of having an image read this big or read this big. Yeah, exactly. And I think I've really shifted a lot of my thinking now to, yeah, will it read like on a phone like that? Because I think that's kind of become our new canvas, really, to some degree. And in some ways it can be a little limiting because, you know, sometimes if you go too detailed, it'll just turn to noise at that size. And I still will do that from time to time. I don't think it's ever good to rely on a rule of thumb too much, you know, but in general, yeah, if it can read that size, I think that's a good sign in this current market that you kind of have something maybe that will resonate, you know. It just sort of seems to be sort of the time and space we're at right now. But
it's interesting you say that, because I've had this conversation with artists before, and they think that
yeah,
the more they put on a cover, and we're going to have some of those. We've got the Spawn universe coming out, and you know,
sure,
you know, Brett and I did one that had a lot of stuff on it.
right.
And so those are fun from time to time. But in terms of doing stuff that I think that catches your eye quickly, I think the simple designs are superior,
Yeah.
because especially when they're backed up with everything that's in there. And I have this thing, and anybody listening right now, you should try it, because it's at least true where I live. If you look at billboards and you follow a billboard, just pick a billboard when you're driving, and take your fingers and go, okay, I'm driving, it's this big, and then spread your fingers as you drive by it. And you'll be surprised at what's the biggest size that billboard is. Most billboards will fit within your two fingers. They will never get bigger than your two fingers, which is essentially your phone turned sideways.
Right.
And yet they design billboards thinking that they're 20 feet big. And it's the same, to me, it's the same philosophy. A good billboard, like a good cover, should be clean at 2 inches by 4 inches. And if it doesn't read at 2 by 4 inches, it's a bad billboard. You're spending a lot of money for no good reason. So when you're constructing then that tiny simple one, are you more focused on action or character, or what is it?
Well, it's funny because there is a contradiction in the sense that, and you know this as much as anybody, the fans, they don't want to feel shortchanged by a cover either. So it's a tricky balance. You need to deliver detail but clean imagery. So it's what I find is it's best to deliver the detail in clusters. So it's not a wall of detail. The detail kind of like hangs out in clusters on a cleaner, maybe more readable layout, like you were talking about. And I think it kind of goes back and forth. And with the women that I'm usually known to draw, they tend to be kind of posy, a little bit more magazine cover-ish. But certainly if it's Spider-Man or Venom or one of these types of characters, I think you have to go action. I mean, nobody wants to see Spider-Man just standing there. I don't think that's as interesting. But a female or woman character, I think she can strike a very alluring pose with just a hip kicked out or a hand on the hip, and that's by no means boring. I think people really tend to gravitate towards that and like that. So I think it really depends on the character's energy that you kind of associate with the character. But I think having a really strong, clean pose, a pose that basically reads really well, really is the character. That's always what you're going for, and that usually will. You can tell if you're nailing it in a sketch this big. I mean, I don't know if I have any of them here, but like I'll usually do sketches for covers that's that big, and that was a sketch for a cover that I mean, that's as big as I'll do it, and that's even kind of big actually. Sometimes I'll do it about half that size because I don't want to overly commit to an idea. If it's going to work at that size, it's going to work, and if it's not, I can tell right away without committing too much time to it. And that's and even to when I'm actually doing my final cover, I'll keep a sketch like this out just so that I don't lose the graphicness, the energy. I don't want to lose that what I've got in that initial sketch, because sometimes it can evaporate. You can over detail it. You can lose the graphicness and sometimes even the pose, the sharpness of the pose. It'll start to dilute the more you sort of like play with it. So you've always got to remind yourself of that original idea.
But it at least from my experience,
Yeah.
It seems like you're not falling in love with your pages, because I know in a couple times that you and I have worked, sometimes you'll send me a sketch. It'd be your favorite thing.
Yeah.
2 days later, you hate it and you throw it away. And it's the same character. And so,
Right.
so talk to me about that, how you just sort of flip, because most people, once they sort of do their first sketch, that's it. They're locked and loaded, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You know, just like, so everybody knows, because we're going to print them someday anyways, and we're going to get to it. When I first asked Scott to do his 4 covers for Spawn's Universe, he sent me 4 sketches, and I still have them. If I could share them, I got them on my screen here. And they were brilliant. I thought they were brilliant, all 4 of them. And then he threw all 4 of them out. And he goes,
I know.
No, not one of the 4, not 2. He threw the whole kit and caboodle out, and he started all over again. So, walk me through, because I thought the first batch was good. I thought the second batch was good. They were all good. What gets you off, not just in mind, but what gets you off an early sketch that you want to do something else?
That's a good question, and it doesn't always happen. I think what happens is you'll get excited by a project, and a couple of images will pop in your head, and you want to get them down on paper. And in that case, that was it. I had a gunslinger idea. I think one of them too was, well, actually, you're right. I did do first versions of all of them that didn't end up. I mean, it's funny. But I think, and I
Spawn, toss that one out.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, I think the She Spawn one that we tossed out was actually in that batch too.
I didn't toss it out.
Oh, it's so easy. You can still do it.
You tossed it.
But I think in that case, I went back to a She Spawn sketch. I think that I showed you from 2 years ago. I think around the 300 time.
Yeah.
So sometimes I resurrect things even too, because I think the new one isn't as good. So it really, but what I often find out is whatever I initially come up with, once I walk away, and I really do believe this, I think your brain is continuing to run an app in the background. Even if you're doing something else, I could be doing the dishes. I could be spending the weekend with my kids. And then I come back on Monday and all these new ideas are there because I downloaded some information when I was doing that original drawing. And then I walked away and something in I find this happens all the time. My brain keeps imagining things in the background. And suddenly I just have all these images that just kind of fill up my head that I didn't even try to think of. And sometimes they're just better because or at least they get me more excited because I allowed that process to happen. So which is often why I like a good amount of lead time before a cover, because I often find if I let that process happen, the cover will just become stronger because I've now, and again, I don't know why, I just feel strongly that this is what's happening, that my subconscious is somehow continuing to be creative in the background. And that's the best way I can kind of compare it. And it never fails.
One of the things I've noticed too in my conversations with you is that color is important as part of your design. It seems like not only have you given me sketches with color, but even when you give me black and white, that topic is close to the surface. So how do you interact with color while you're sort of contemplating what you're doing?
Yeah, I think I'm a frustrated colorist who's not is not coloring his own work yet, because I think I've just, as the years have gone on, I've become more and more gravitating to color and what mood it can convey. And also too, a lot of times I think we were talking about the simplification of like making a design work on a phone. To some degree, I've also found being sort of restrictive with what colors you use can also work to your advantage as well. A lot of times in recent years, the covers I do will have 2 primary colors. I mean, primary colors that are being used, not necessarily the primary colors, but like I'll usually have a main color and a secondary color. And again, I find that helps that design read really well at this size. And so if anything, what I'm often talking to with my colorist is saying like, no, let's stay within this palette. Let's not go too far out of it, because that's going to really hone in the feeling, the look. It's going to make it jump out of the shelves because it's not going to be every color on the rainbow. It's going to be green with purple background or something like that. It's going to really punch through from across the room because you're going to really read those two, colors working together. So that's oftentimes how I feel.
So let's see if you can explain to the audience here a little bit. So let's just look at it. This is a black and white of one of your covers, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, the color version of this was spectacular, right?
Yeah, I love it.
Because of what you see here, you might not sort of notice is that there's stained glass window up here, and then there's Spawn here, right? But you hadn't drawn this character maybe but once or something. I remember when I was asking you to come up with a cover for issue 300. So
Right.
even for like this one specifically, I don't know if you remember what you were going through, because I don't know if people can see, but there's the detail is like in the stained glass window, there's actually some of the characters that are in the book that are all littered in that stained glass window, right? So that's what you were talking about earlier about, you just get something simple and then you can play with details after the fact.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I think I remember sending you. I think it was a color comp of that cover, and I think you were the one who suggested adding the characters into the stained glass, which was brilliant because it added such another dimension to the whole cover. But again, that was one where I had 2 or 3 other ideas before I got to that idea. I had one where I think we were talking about, because in the book he was going to kind of go through a visual transformation in Greg's story. And I was trying to hint, there was a cover I had or an idea where there was a rip in it and it was going to have 3 different incarnations of the Spawn. And then I had another one where I was working the 300 into 3 windows. I mean, I had some other ideas, but again, because I was thinking of that and I walked away, one day that image just popped in my head. And it was so clear, that image, that I was convinced you had already drawn it. I was like going like, oh, that had to have, I must have seen that somewhere. And I Googled like crazy, all the Spawn covers, going like, this had to have been drawn. It's too familiar to me for some reason. It just feels like I've seen it. It reminded me of, I think Paul McCartney had not that I'm comparing myself to Paul McCartney, but he has a famous story where when he wrote Yesterday, that he just woke up knowing the song and he went around to everybody saying, what's this song that I'm singing? And everybody was like, I've never heard that song. And that's why Yesterday just kind of happened, because he was so convinced he had heard it. And then he just recorded it because nobody said they'd ever heard it. And in some ways that just happens. And that cover was one of those ones. I was like, this had to have been drawn. How has he not been in a church with a stained glass window? This had to have happened, but it didn't. And yeah, there you go. Now that the other cover.
Perhaps there was a couple of small panels inside,
maybe, yeah.
But nothing there. The other thing too is that, like, as I sort of skimmed through the book, remember I was able to con you into doing some interior pages, right?
I seem to recall that.
Right. So I would consider even your interior pages as being cover layouts, right? That could have been trimmed into a cover.
Right, for sure.
Very easily. I mean, you did some big, half of that would have been a cool cover.
Yeah. Yeah, so for sure.
There obviously all those instincts that you have in your head were being carried even into some of your interior pages.
Well, I feel I might have you to blame for that. I recall a certain Spider-Man run being very anchored with really great Spidey shots in interior pages, going, that's brilliant. Each one of these pages could be a cover, but it's Spidey going through the city with a couple of cool panels on the side, and it always worked so well. I think it stayed in my head.
So let me ask you, obviously you mentioned before, you do a bunch of pretty girl posing and stuff like that, and you're very well known and the fans love it, right?
Right.
So you've been doing it for a long time, which is why you're so good. But I'm sure people sort of might ask the question of, do you still enjoy it? Or does it, after a while, it's like singing your hit song from the 70s over and over and over.
Yeah.
Do you have to take a bit of a deep breath and then psych yourself up and go? Or so talk to us about that.
It can be. There's a part of it that can be like that. A good example might be Mary Jane, which is a character I've done quite a bit of art for, designed statues of her, and tried to get my own take on it, even though she didn't appear other than just in covers and other images. I feel like to some degree I've been, at least from the feedback I've gotten from collectors, that I was successful enough to at least interject a representation of her that's uniquely my vision of her into the mythos, or whatever you want to call it, the history of Spider-Man, that hopefully will have some lasting effect. But that being said, sometimes it's a little harder now to, when people want me to draw Mary Jane, to kind of come up with something they haven't seen already. So yeah, I find myself creatively struggling a little bit more and more with that particular character, going like, well, what have I done that they haven't seen? And at the same time, they kind of don't want her to look too different than they've already seen her anyway. They want me to stick to my own rules I created around drawing her. So sometimes that's that tricky balance. Like, you want to keep evolving, but you don't want to not give them what they want. So that becomes a little tricky, which is why it's refreshing to do something like Spawn, because it allows me to do something different. I think that's probably the reason I enjoy doing covers so much, is I am allowed to jump around and try different things and grow as an artist by doing different characters, different material. And I think sometimes it can feel restricting when your fans want you to draw your greatest hits to some degree, like you were saying. I think sometimes it does become challenging. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, that's what you work so hard to do. You want to be known for something. You want a fan group to think that they love something you do, but then it's the curse that you have to keep doing it. So it's a yin yang, I guess. It's good and bad.
A couple more things before I let you go, and I appreciate you giving me time. Number one, what's coming out in the immediate future that people can look forward to, that's coming down the pipeline, sort of July, August, September sort of timeline?
That's that's a really good question. I feel like so many, you probably know what this feels like.
Do you know when your covers are coming out? Do they just say, hey, we need a cover, you do it, and then you just get back and eventually they tell you?
I usually have an idea, as you found out probably with Spawn Universe. I have an idea, but sometimes I'm a little bit off with what I think they're going to be. But no, I have an idea. I mean, I actually this summer into the fall is actually probably one of the biggest gaps I have coming up, where there won't be a tremendous amount of cover output, because I'm actually working on a couple of secret projects, actually, which I can't quite divulge what they are just yet, but I'm definitely working very hard. It's funny, I very often feel it's challenging in this sort of social media age to constantly be putting the material out there to keep your audience engaged, especially when you're developing. Like right now, I'm developing several statues. I can't. That one came out pretty recently. Yeah. That was
your statues. If people haven't seen your statues, let me see if I can find on your Instagram.
Yeah. There might be the Cinderella one on there, or the MJ Spidey one was on there.
Recently. There's a video there, or whatever. Yeah, no, they're spectacular. They've done a very good job of capturing your look.
Yeah.
Actually, in the actual sculpt itself. So
no, I appreciate that. Yeah,
a very good likeness of your style, which can be hard to translate 2D to 3D, right? I mean,
it can be.
Somebody who makes toys, I know at times if you're trying to do something like that, it can be. I mean, again, if you look at somebody like Homer Simpson, we all know what he looks like, but the moment you have to make a toy, you have to make it front, side, and back. What does he look like?
Yeah,
from the back? We've never seen it, right? So you have to
be challenging.
But some of those statues that are there. One other thing, I know you're pretty sort of prolific, if you will, of doing signings and having stuff on your website for people to get. So if anybody wants anything, what's your website? Give them your address.
You can pretty much find anything and everything under the sun at jscottcampbell.com in regards to me. And pretty easy to remember there. I was fortunate enough years ago to get my name on there. It's harder and harder these days. But jscottcampbell.com has, I think there might even be a few Spawn covers that just popped up on there recently.
Yeah, so if anybody's looking for stuff, I know you're good at that. But and then from time to time, I'll do the odd signing. But I keep thinking, you and I've talked about in the back of our mind, that at some point we need to hook up and do it at the same time.
Yeah, a CGC or something like that.
Make a signing where if you want sort of your Scott stuff, you can send it in. He'll be there signing. If you want your Todd stuff, I'll be there signing. But if you have pieces that are Scott and Todd, then you can send those in. Not that we've done a lot together, but the handful that we have, they could send those in and they could get
That'd be
both
awesome.
signatures at the exact same time. So
That'd be awesome. And we just had a few books come out just last week, so that's perfect timing for somebody to get them both on there. That'd be awesome.
No, I mentioned it to like Greg Capullo too, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, we should go, and they can send in your Greg stuff, your Todd stuff. But then if you want Greg and Todd, that becomes a third pile, and then we just sort of hit it all at the same time.
Right. No need to crack them open and put them back in plastic.
You know, there's three areas they can send it in.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool. I think it'd work. Right?
That'd be awesome.
Fans would appreciate it, other than being at a 10-minute signing or 15-hour signing, and you only can get a limited amount, right? Open it up early to everybody on the globe. So anyways, we'll have to coordinate that. So if you're up to it,
I'm down. Everybody, I'm on record. I think that's great. I totally would do it.
we'll do it. All right. Well, Scott, best of luck. I appreciate all the coverage you gave. Let me say before I go, I think I mentioned to you that a couple of people were going, I see in the solicitations, J. Scott Campbell supposed to do 4 covers. Let me just warn you, he's not doing 4 covers. He's never going to do 4 covers on one book. It's ridiculous. He's probably doing like a virgin, a black and white, and a raw pencil of the same one cover. Don't get suckered in. I wanted to go back to like some of those and go, so did you under order then? Because there's 4 difference, right? I mean, eventually we showed them all. So, you know, hopefully
well, that's on me. If I probably got them done sooner, I would have cleared up all confusion. That was classic me at the last minute.
That was store owner, so maybe you and I procrastinating a little bit. But
who was?
Thanks to you, the Spawn Universe is going back to a second print after just 3 days. So,
that's awesome. Congrats. That's fantastic. I'm not surprised, but that's awesome.
No, not like to all of us. It's a team effort. So I know.
Well,
they bought a lot of those books because of the covers, and you did 4 out of the 6. So
I'm flattered to have been involved. Believe me, that's I mean, not just on one major Spawn event, but 2. I feel like very fortunate to have.
And I've got 4 unused sketches that you threw.
You do. He's not lying, folks.
Part of me, Scott, let me say, there's a part of me that almost wants to, even if we do like one of them and tighten it up and get it pretty. There's a part of me that wants to just print your sketch, because I don't think. I think people will actually be pleasantly surprised at how
maybe
well developed like your little sketches are, that it would still hold up on a cover. I think they're cool.
Yeah,
I think they're cool.
That might be pretty fun. I mean, that's I'm not against it. And all those ones you saw too, I'm still would love to see them to fruition in some way or fashion at some point.
We're gonna get
for sure.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate you coming in, talking a little bit of comic, a little bit.
Hey, I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. All right, you be good. Enjoy the rest of your San Diego con.
Thanks, guys. Have fun, guys.
All right. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
All right. So it was a nice talk about the art side of comic books, a little bit of Spawn specifically. But I want to shift gears now and talk a little bit more specific, obviously, about Spawn and his universe, but now get in on the character and the writing side of it, right? So, I mean, there's art, there's covers, there's colors, there's everything, but everything has to still come from an initial story idea. With me expanding the Spawn's universe and knowing that I was going to go into 4 titles, I also knew that I couldn't do all 4 of those books on my own. I mean, doing one Spawn comic book, I've been doing that for a long time. It's easy for me, even though I do a bunch of other stuff. Once I knew I had to do 4, I knew I was going to have to go and get some help. And so I reached out to this young man here to see if he would be interested. I'd had some interaction with him on another project, and I just thought his head was filled with some ideas, and I threw across his head, "Hey, Sean, would you like to come aboard and help me build a world?" And thankfully, he said yes. So just so everybody knows, we're going to have 4 books. We're going to have the regular Spawn book. We're going to have King Spawn, Gunslinger, and the Scorch, which is a team book. Sean will be handling King Spawn. and the team book, and I'll be at the beginning handling the regular book, a regular classic Spawn and the Gunslinger. So anyway, thanks for joining us, Sean. Just thought we'd sort of have a chit chat a little bit about giving a little bit of insight to some of the people here that are listening. The simple question is, how do you build a universe, right? So let's talk about that, because again, and you don't have to agree or disagree with anything I do. I don't even know what your thought process was through a lot of it in terms of in between our conversations, which is what I'm sort of more interested in. So obviously you had a lot of success on your own projects, which is sort of why and how we met with other items you did and some of the stuff specifically with Image. But what's your overall process just about creating stories? Forget Spawn, just creating stories and character as a whole.
I mean, a big thing for me is always theme. Like, I want to know what's the deeper thing that the book is going to be about, is something that gets me really interested. And then how we can explore character in a new and exciting way, not only for me, but for the artist, is like trying to figure out, the other books I've done at Image have been co-creations with the artist. And a lot of times it's me working with them on like, what do you want to draw? What are you interested in the world right now? What are you angry about? what do you want to set on fire? That's kind of where a lot of the conversations start. I mean, with you is a little different because we started with like these marathon phone calls about Spawn itself and like the Spawn universe and the idea of what you were doing. And it was different than when I'm talking to an artist and we have nothing to start from and we're just like, I don't know, I think the internet's weird. Like, I don't like Twitter. And we just start from there and it starts to build out bigger.
So Earl, but you just said you like to know what the theme. How complicated is that word for you? Is it about like betrayal? Is it that simple? Or at times is it a lot more sophisticated than that?
No, I think it has to be that simple. I think it sometimes starts out really big and then it's trying to suck it down because you want to make it understandable for an audience reading it. Because, if you say it's about the internet, I keep thinking, like we met very much through Thumbs. And so I'm like, if you think about Thumbs, it's like very heavily like.
Thumbs is your book. That's the title of your book.
All right. Yeah. Thumbs is a comic I did at Image Comics with Hayden Sherman. And it's very much about like a near future world that's very influenced by the internet in good and very negative ways. And so like when you get into that, you're like, there's so much involved with like what the internet could be. This is like overwhelming. So then you have to kind of just suck it down to like, thematically, that book ended up being about like responsibility of like who's responsible. So there's a mom character who's responsible for the kid. There's a kid character who's responsible for his sister. Like that it ends up going like you said, like a single word that you can kind of, that an audience can then read it and it's not getting slammed over their head, but like when you step back, you're like, oh, that thing felt really unified. Like I felt like every part was working together. That to me is theme, is like it can touch into a lot of different places, but it makes the whole book feel like it's gelling, at all times.
Yeah. So if we go back to, like you're saying, we had the marathon conversations. Part of that, just to let people on the inside know, is that I was just trying to download you with sort of as much information, not so that you could repeat it, but so that you weren't going over sort of the same ground, right? And so it was like, oh, by the way, Sean, let me just sort of tell you what I think the 300 issues of Spawn are. And there's a lot of cracks in between this. You can pull whatever thread you want out of any of it, or better than that, invent your own threads and do it, right? My whole thing to all of this, not only with you and with the artist, is that I've been painting this painting for close to 30 years, but I see the canvas as being this big. And to me, I've only painted this much so far. I've only painted 25% of it. What's the other 75% that hasn't been touched yet? That's where I need the help, not going over the same ground, but going, hey, where haven't I gone? What's the ideas that I've been too dumb not to be able to explore? And I toss those up at you.
Yeah, I think you're being absurdly humble. I mean, you're an insane resource. Like, it's kind of daunting. Like, I came in and the like 300 books had already been finished, right? And like that's just like this mega like sized universe to begin with. But what was cool is like I love mythology. I was obsessed with it as a kid, just in general. Like it didn't matter if it was Greek or Norse or where it came from, but like learning stories and seeing all the things a character could be and all their history has always been like exciting to me. So it was really fun because I'd be able to like throw ideas or questions towards you and we would end up like riffing for like a half hour, an hour of like, oh, I did do that in like issue 167 and then this happened and this happened, but there's a hole here or there's a character here. And it started, at least for me, it started opening up these fun places where I was like, you know, what are the things that we can still explore? What are things that are like ripe for being deepened or being reintroduced because it's been such a long journey, you know, that it started becoming like, oh, who are characters that we haven't seen in a while and what's their deal, you know, like what's a deeper exploration of who they are and what they could mean to Al is.
Well, one of the things too in those conversations, and anybody listening that wants to be a writer, was I was pretty impressed too with your flexibility. And here's why I say that is that sometimes you would throw something at me and you'd say, hey, I want to make character A a good guy and here's why. And then sometimes I'd say, hey, Sean, what if we made him a bad guy or whatever? I'm being overly simple. I was actually taking some of your ideas, if you remember, and actually throwing the opposite version at you, which at times can be startling, I know, for somebody that just came up with an idea to go, what? I've been living with that for 5 days. I love it. And you're saying, can we do the opposite of it, right? Don't go up, go down. But I thought in some cases that some of the ideas that we ultimately landed on would you sort of being flexible enough to sort of take your own idea and then turn it on its head and then come back with something I thought was more interesting by looking at it differently. I mean, again, we didn't always land on it by looking at the opposite version, but sometimes it's a way to solve problems. If you can't solve it good in the direction you're going, then think about it being the opposite, right? That it's every story element, you go, man, well, how do we get him to save the sister? And then you struggle and you struggle. The answer is, well, then don't make it that he saves the sister, make it that he doesn't save the sister, right? So that's a different story. So what's that story? Is that story more interesting that he doesn't do it, or that he tries to save his sister and he finds out that his sister was the one that was actually the bad guy all along, or whatever? I'm making it up. But you were sort of flexible within all the parameters of all the stuff that we were doing, given that we're trying to, you know, fill this world with a bunch of creatures now and a bunch of people that have motivations. So, but
yeah, well, you know, it's a funny thing. Like when writers ask for advice, I think one of the things that doesn't get talked enough about is like not being precious. Like there's a lot of talk about like control your idea, fight for idea, but I think that's inherent. I just think like if you're a creator, you naturally do that, or else I don't know how you got to creating. Like there's a level of like ego and arrogance that is natural to it. But I think like flexibility and kind of striving for like not only what's the best idea, but I feel like when you hit resistance, instead of immediately going into like, they didn't like my idea, which means I'm bad, and so like I'm either going to ignore them or sulk or whatever, which doesn't help anybody. It's so much easier to go like, okay, out of the suggestions, like it doesn't even matter what I agree with or what I don't. It's more a question of like, what gives us the most emotional resonance in the book? Like what's going to hit a reader like right in the chest, or what's going to give us more story, right? Like if a suggestion comes in and I'm like, oh man, that opens up like another like 10 issues. That's exciting immediately because you're like, I had an idea that was going to like end at that issue and I didn't know, we probably couldn't do anything with it afterwards. But now when we flip it and we're manipulating it and now I'm going down the road a little bit, we start to go like, oh man, there's a whole life now we can explore in that place. And that's just like, that's a win. You know, like I think you're just looking for the wins.
I think one of the luxuries we have as writing comic books is that we can do a lot of them over a short period of time. If you're writing a novel and you're trying to do a TV show or a movie, those come in batches of years, like one every few years. So I actually can understand the conversation of somebody saying fight for your idea, because you're putting 3 years of your life into it, and it might not come around again for another 3 years. For you and I, because we do our own comic books, I mean, you do your own, right? If you want to do something and fight for your own, just do your own comic book, right? If I got a great idea that I want to make my own, I write Spawn, right? So I don't have to worry about shoving it down your throat. Because I got my own book, I'll shove it down my own throat going, look at Sean, I don't care about what Sean's doing, I'm going to do my own thing. So I'm not inclined to have, nor do I even want the book that you're doing, King Spawn, that will be coming out soon, to emulate and be exactly what Spawn is. Because to me, it's like, what I don't know what the fun is of doing that. Because if I wanted the book to be exactly the same, I would have just chosen me to write both Spawn books, and then you could have wrote Guns, you could write Gunslinger and The Scorch, right? But I wanted somebody else to come in and do Spawn almost as a challenge, because I want to be jealous. I want to be looking at your stories, and you've done some stuff that I'm jealous of, that I want to look at and go, man, I've been doing this for 30 years. Man, why didn't I think of this? This guy's been here for 30 days and he's already coming up with stuff I should have thought about in 30 years, right? That to me is sort of cool. And then we can sort of bounce back and forth off each other. And again, just to show people, that's the book that Sean's going to be doing with artist Javi Fernandez. It's going to be cool. If you like sort of moody, gritty books, this is your book. This book's going to be for you. And it's one of the good things about me expanding into other books, I think, is that I'm now given sort of ramps for other characters to exist in different places, so that I don't have to have them all jammed into the Spawn books. Because I think Spawn on his own, going solo, is when he's sort of at his best. I just think as a character, he's a loner. He just does it at his best. He's going to be involved, obviously, in the team book, so we're going to get to see that part. But I still think he's way better when he's just saying, I got this. I'll take care of this. I'll be back in 2 hours. And those are some of the stories that you're about to unleash on us. So give us a thought of what some of the things you were trying to accomplish thematically and with the stories that you thought would be fun.
I thought one of the big things is, like, I remember the first time you talked to me about it, before I even knew how or if I was going to be involved, is you were like, we're going to have this amazing book. It's this King Spawn like character, like Conan, like coming through the fire. And one of the things that hit me immediately is I was just like, I wonder for Spawn what it means to be a king. Like, that was a fascinating idea to me, is I'm like, because you mentioned, like, he's a loner. He's never been about having subjects. He's never been really about having followers or people around him. And I'm like, what is it like for that guy to then be ordained in a way, right? Like, what does that mean? And then another big thing that I've constantly been fascinated by, as a reader even, has always been like, you basically have like the embodiment of vengeance in Spawn, which is what makes him like so fun and badass. And yet the one thing he can't really get vengeance for in a lot of ways in this all-powerful character is the missing of Wanda, is like losing his wife and losing his life, like from the very beginning, like this, like everything, how it was set up. And so I've always been really fascinated by, like, what do kingdoms, what do God, what does religion mean to Al Simmons and therefore Spawn? And also, what does all that history and life mean when you're enacting all this vengeance for everyone else? What does it mean if you may not ever be able to get it for yourself? I just think is like a super intriguing question. So those have been kind of like things, like, as I've been going issue by issue and looking at this growth and this like anger and this vengeance and rage, but like, who is Al at the center and core of it all? Those have honestly just been like my obsessions for the past, I'd say, like 6 to 8 months.
Well, with some of the event of the stories that you're going to be bringing here, I mean, we also wanted to sort of bring a certain timbre, if you will, to the feel of it, right? Which is why Javi, the artist, was a choice that I made specifically because I thought he was gothic. Let's call it that. He wasn't I mean, there are people who do pretty drawings, superhero drawings, right? I mean, I hired one guy, this, right? Jim Chung does beautiful superhero humans, where Javi to me is way close to a Batman artist and a Superman artist. That's my demarcation for every artist. I go, would I put them on Superman or Batman first, right? Because I think those two characters are drastically different if you draw them correctly. But Javi coming on, and you and I have seen it, because we've now seen 3 issues from him, is literally, I keep telling people, let me just tell you, if you like King Spawn #1 and you get a kick out of it, dude, it's just getting better, right? Yeah. His artwork, he's getting into a groove. Every artist takes a while to figure out the character of how you do it and why you do it and what's the reason and the rationale. And he's just starting to, like a train leaving the station, those wheels are starting to turn and he's starting to get into a groove visually, right? I mean, we keep seeing him every day, some of the stuff that's coming out.
I mean, I do. There's pages on issue 3 that are like some of the coolest, best comic art I feel like I've ever seen and or been a part of. Like, Javi's amazing. And I would agree. I think also like Javi and I are also learning how, like, we're now influencing each other. Like, I've learned like some of his style and he's learning my writing. We've clearly become very appreciative of each other. Like, it's been a very fun working relationship, but that guy can do anything.
The thing that's interesting, and this shouldn't be sort of an insignificant thing I'm about to say to people that are listening, is the vast majority of comic books are being done with the writers writing full scripts, handing it to the artist, and the artist taking the full script and going from it. Both Sean, I think, and Javi were sort of trained in that method. And one of the things I wanted to do right out of the gate was to say, no, nay, we're not doing it that way, right? For a couple of reasons. One, I found that, because I don't write that way, and every time I get an artist, I say, I'm not giving you a full script. I find those that have been doing 8-10 years of full script artistically, they've lost a little bit of the muscle of storytelling, what I call storytelling, which is, I don't want to tell you how to pace your action and your story and your quiet scenes. I want you to start being the director and thinking about it. I mean, they are anyways, even if you got the page layout, but even more so if you say, page 1 is these 2 guys in the office, and by the end of page 2, one of them leaves in a huff, right? Go. I know what I'm going to write to some extent, but I'm going to take the lead from the actors, and the actors are whatever the artist puts down on paper. So talk about a little bit about sort of that shift, because I know it's not an easy shift to start going, because I know that I was even taking your first script and getting rid of a lot of words, not talking word, but descriptive word, because as an artist, Javi doesn't need that word. He doesn't need that word. He doesn't need that word. You just need to say, cool shot of this. That's enough. Let him go on that one. But anyways.
No, it's been cool because, I think it's funny as a writer, you try to think of yourself as a communicator, and you often forget sometimes having too many words is actually less clear or less freeing. It's definitely less freeing, but it can often be less clear than in trying to be so specific about every little piece that you want or need, that then you get the art back and you're like, I thought it was gonna be better and more exciting than this. And then, I think that there's been a lot of times where it's like, let his imagination run wild. Like, he's the visual artist. I am not. He knows how to do that in a way I never can. So sometimes I've definitely been learning that suggestion can pay off 10 times more than insane specificity, really. Just being able to say Javi, I want this to be a badass murder scene. I want the chains to do this. The chains are like snakes. And then he'll turn in something and I'm like, oh, that is way cooler.
Way better than we thought. Right. No, he's better. And the thing is that I found too, is that once you can get people to not think of it as being a fearful thing, because it's like, oh, what do you mean I got to be the director, Todd? That done right, they should get more engaged. And it's one of the things I'm seeing, and you're seeing from Javi, is that you can see it in his artwork, but in his emails. Hey,
Right.
I thought, what if we did this? And what if, and so he's starting to think like a storyteller, and he's doing, that's it. I'm going, yes. Instead of it just being an assignment, him reading the page, him emulating the page that a writer gave him, he's actually trying to be a participant in it. And I always think, even if you miss it, even if every page isn't awesome, that I'd rather take that effort from somebody artistically that basically is going to take some chances and every now and then skin their knees, than to not ever give him a chance with the ball, right? So he's and I something's happening, because at the beginning he gave me how fast he could draw.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, so okay, I'll put you on the book anyway, but I'm gonna have to find some help. But he's going way faster than he ever told me. So usually that means that he either was shy or he's enjoying himself. And I'm hoping it's sort of the latter, because if you get people that enjoy what can be hard labor, which is drawing a page, every day, nonstop, monthly comic books as an artist, I think is the hardest job that there is, because you got a blank piece of paper and you got to go. Even though somebody's giving you a blueprint, you still have to go. And as soon as you get the page filled, they take it and they give you another blank page. So but you're giving him, he's responding back saying, hey, thanks, Sean, for giving me this cool stuff, imagery. You're giving him imagery that he can think about, which is sort of the simpatico that you hopefully, I'm betting by the time you guys get to issue 8, 10, 12, like that's when all of a sudden you start getting that team that we talked about when I was a kid. There were certain teams that were,
Right.
oh my gosh, right? So Burn Austin, oh my gosh, they're killing it.
No, I mean, I would love to. It's a joy. It's a joy working with them, and I feel like I think you're right. I think with every issue, it's becoming more of a co-creation, where like the ideas are being thrown back freely without worry of offending anybody, and really just in the thought of like, if we did this on this page, we could open up a double page spread here, which then it's very easy for me to go, oh man, I see what you're talking about. Let me go back and get you some new pages that we can make that execute correctly, and that's been great. And yeah, his art, I just think people are going to lose their mind. There's a couple of pages I just keep thinking of that I'm like, there's no way you're not going to lose. The end of 3 alone, I'm like, you're going to lose your mind.
I know, no, right, because I've been at it for a long time, and every now and then he sends me a page that I'm going, wow, that's kind of awesome, right? So I go, wow. So if he can still surprise a 30-year vet,
Right.
what about that person just been reading comic books or might even be new to Spawn, right? One of the things that I'm hoping for is, with the introduction of the book and making it $5.99 and making it an easy jump on point. And once we get going, just so everybody knows, King Spawn, yes, issue number 1 is going to be a little expensive because it's going to be a thicker book. But once we get going, it's going to be a $2.99 book, right? $2.99 book. I'm going to be upgrading the cover stock on all the books. So I don't have one here, but it's basically going to be the same stock that we had on Spawn 301, like almost like a cardboard. And
Right.
like if you take it, like the last issue I did without it, and you hold the book, it limps. And if you take it now, it sits like a ruler, right? And so for the same $2.99, we're going to make the $2.99 like a sexy book, and for people who like collectibles and some of you like grading, it's all going to go there. Let's jump to dialogue for a minute.
Sure.
Obviously, just like anything in a movie and TV shows, novels, we have 20 pages, and in some cases you got 5, 6 panels. And so there is a sort of a shortcut we have to get everything across without it coming and being too simplistic, a little bit juvenile, I think it's a hard thing. I think comic book dialogue and I fail miserably a lot of time because I'm trying to go, what would the real person say? I don't have the room for. So
Right.
talk to me about how you tackle dialogue. There's story, there's character, there's theme, and then it's like, oh, now that I've got Javi's cool art or whoever artist you're working with, then how do I put words in people's mouth?
I mean, it's the most it's the most multi-process part of what I do is the dialogue. So like when I turn in, usually like I'll write a plot script for Hobby, like we talked about, but I'll put dialogue in and then I'll take it out before we send it on. And that's all, partially that's because I know that is not going to be anywhere near the final dialogue. It's kind of like how I'm working out, like, okay, exposition's gonna have to happen in this sequence for us to understand what happens in this part of the book. Here's some points where I get some dialogue going. And then honestly, while Hobby is off drawing the issue, I usually then go in on my own blank piece of paper and I do like blank dialogue. I just start to think of the scenes and just let the character say as much as humanly possible, or their cool movie lines or whatever. I just write without saying no to myself, just as much dialogue as I can for the whole issue. Then I edit it again. Then I get Hobby's art and I see what he did. And I go, okay, none of this, like, hard, like 20% at best now fits or is proper for what the issue really needs. And then I just kind of sit down with it each day and take that 20% and all the other drafts, knowing what I need to do, and kind of tackle a page a day, just going through like, okay, what are they saying on this to get us to here, to here, to here. It's not scientific, but it's definitely the most intensive part of what I do, because it is, I agree. I think comic dialogue, somebody asked me about it a long time ago, and I was like, it's really weird because it's kind of like writing a poem, in the sense of like, there's only so much space on a page. So like, you're trying to be as efficient as possible and yet be as clear and be as cool and as exciting. Like, you're trying to do all three things at one time. And yeah, sometimes you'll lose out on a page. Like, sometimes I'm like, this is going to be an exposition page. I'm going to try and make it cool, but like, we need this to happen. And it kind of becomes that kind of game back and forth to get the best, it's weird to say this, the best sounding issue that you can't, like, I know you're not listening to the issue, but like, as I'm writing it, I'm listening to it. I'm trying to think of it that way.
So before I let you go then, Sean, what are some of the goals, whether they're short-term or long-term, that you would like to bring to the process of sort of world building in the Spawn's universe? Whether you've even cleared them through me or not is not relevant right now, and whether I agree with any of your goals doesn't matter.
I mean, are you talking in terms of story or personal?
It's like, just basically, if I said, hey, you know what, I'm retiring here, Sean, it's your universe, go. You know, like, with some of the stuff that you hope to, like, what would you like to get out of it? I mean, besides people liking it, just like what personal satisfaction even would are you looking for out of any of it?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a place. I mean, whatever. That starts as like me as a prepped answer. So in the unprepped way, like, what I'm really interested in is like, I'm having an amazing time exploring the absolute darkness of Spawn, and then who Al is as a human, like how much humanity is left in Al, and what does that mean? You know, like, I'm an adult male, I'm 40 years old. So there's a part of me that I'm like, what are the things in the world where I wish I could be Spawn, that I could just show up and throw chains around and tear everything apart? And what are those places where I'm still stuck being me? And what are like the higher versions of that? That allows me a place into Al. My own life, I'm pretty much a loner. I don't have a lot of like friends I actively see. I'm very work committed. And so it's been interesting with Al exploring like what it is for him to be a loner, and what are the things that he needs in his life. You know, like, I've been exploring some of his like, what is a friendship to Al is like a really interesting idea, you know? And I'd love to keep getting into, I'm really interested in like the humanity of Al. I'm curious to keep diving in, because I think it's the part I don't understand the most. And so I learn something every time I write it. And I will say, there is an amazing personal release in writing Spawn, like if I separate those two, because being able to have an outlet where all the anger and rage at things that upset me in the world can be funneled is pretty great. I mean, in the Spawn world, I want to keep coming up with the most elaborate, insane, absurd, crazy, but like incredible murder scenes as humanly possible. And at the same time, I want to see like how grounded Al is and what does Al actually need, if anything. Like that, those are the things that, like, the juxtaposition of the book, I feel like I'm wrestling with each issue is like, how can I make all of these action sequences the type of thing that not only excite like 13-year-old Sean picking up a Spawn issue, but also like, how do they blow my mind currently and my peers' mind? I'm pretty competitive in some ways, so like that too is part of it. And then the flip of that is like, how can I make this a great novel at the same time when I'm exploring all the stuff that has to do with Al and the team and his personal relationships and a stepdaughter, a missing wife, you know, like all, I think there's a part of me that's like, how is this like Fitzgerald and the Predator? You know?
A couple things before I let you go, Sean.
Right.
Just got this in the mail, so I got to ink it here. So this is a great Capullo.
Cover.
King Spawn 1. So this will be on your book. I've got to go and ink it. So there's Greg doing his thing with his big.
The sword, man.
He's got looks like a little bit of a thrown back in there or something. So I've got to get that in the next couple of weeks. One last thing before we go. People are asking me, they're going, "Oh, is King Spawn different? Like, is he a new character?" And I'm like, no. In its simplest term, and I'll let you sort of give your take on it. The simple version of that is when I went to go look for incredible, amazing, spectacular, all those words were already taken, right? So to me, it's a word above to basically signify there's two books, and so there's Spawn, and then I need to come up with something else. So he's not literally going to walk around as a king or whatever else. To me, the word king signifies a leader, somebody who has sort of a mission and a plan and a strategy, good, bad, or indifferent, to basically lead people in a direction in the future to do something, and will get constant pushback on all of it. And so the word to me, sort of king, is just sort of almost his maturity now, as you mentioned earlier, that the character is now maturing and is becoming more of a leader instead of just a war, one of the guys in the foxhole. He's becoming the general in this big sort of war. Oh, by the way, there will be this back thing that people are going to be scrumming for, that they want to become leaders of different things because they perceive themselves, then if they get it, they'll be the leader, so that somehow they'll be the king, right? So to me it's a big word that has a big meaning. It's not specific.
Right.
So for people who are thinking you're going to pick up the first issue and all of a sudden there's going to be Spawn sitting on a throne with a thing and whatever else, and it's 20 years in the future, no. It still is the same Spawn from the classic book. It's just that now he's really focused on his agenda in a way. And King Spawn just sounds regal. And I want our hero, to be regal as much as possible. So anyways, what's it mean?
It's more of like a symbolic king. I should be more clear on that. It's kingdoms. It's kingdoms in the sense of how, like, Breaking Bad is basically about kingdoms, right? Like you don't call Walter White a king, but like there's all these personal fiefdoms and battles and movements towards like who's going to be the top dog more than anything, right?
Yep.
And I think in terms of the ways that it's different, because I get asked the same question at times, like since the announcement, people are like, is it the same? Is it Al? Is it the same as the other book? How are they different? And I'm like, I don't. It's a weird, for me, it's sometimes a weird question, because I'm like, there's Batman and there's Detective Comics. And I'm like, well, there's Batman, and then there's also like the Dark Knight, like the Frank Miller Batman. And I'm like, a very different Batman than what Batman was up until that point, like, and I think with what Javi's doing, like, it is a very gothic world. Like, I think it clicked for me. You sent me a picture from his Instagram early on in our conversations that was a house he had drawn, and it was a Batman, but it was from Batman, and it was like super gothic, like Edgar Allan Poe meets the Dark Knight type of thing. And I was like, oh, totally, I get what this is.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that it's a pretty dark book. Like there's a lot of thriller elements to it. There's a lot of horror. And I remember one of the things you mentioned to me early on is when you were hiring me, which I thought was a great note that helped free me, is like when I was wrestling with some early drafts. I don't know if you remember this, but you were like, don't worry about writing my Spawn or the Spawn you read. You were like, I read your stuff and there was this adult quality to it that I really loved. And there was a weirdness to it that I really loved. Like, embrace that. And I feel like that's kind of a direction I've taken, where it's got this dark gothicness, and it does have, you know, all these kind of influences that are kind of like a Dark Knight, that are kind of like, it's such a weird question, but I feel like
I think I also may have mentioned to you, treated when you were struggling a bit. I think I also said treat it as a book about war,
right.
Like make it a war book, and then it all makes sense in my head. That's how I think about it, because there's all these and this is what happens in World War I, World War II. People have to join in these sort of unholy alliances for what they think is their cause, and the next war they're on the other side. And so their sides are jumping. The only reason I say that because we've got humans, we've got heaven, and we've got hell, and I want all of that to just be a mosh pit at some point. But it's because if it's just the good guys, the bad guys, and the humans, that's not interesting to me. It needs to have all these shades of gray. But if people are betraying each other and backstabbing and being spies, and that's all war. It's all war. It's all warfare. All's fair in love and war. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that opened up a lot for me in terms of like, it made me think of books I've absolutely adored. Like it made me think of like Garth Ennis's Punisher Born. It made me think of Frank Miller's Dark Knight. It made me think of Delfano's like Hellblazer. And I started thinking like, what if Spawn's the best of all of this? Like what if it has this kind of adult taking risks, taking chances, dangerous, dark, cool, exciting tone at all times. And so then that really became like, at least for me, I took that as the marching orders for myself that I was giving myself, is like, I don't know, it feels weird to say this. I try to be as humble as possible, but I was just like, this is the kind of stuff I want to compete with, right? Like these are runs that I adore that are like legendary. Like this is the stuff I want to go after in this book. You know, it's an iconic character, so it became very much like, you don't get this shot, so like take the shot. You know,
now, hopefully 20 years we'll go, man, we were there at the ground level. That was kind of fun. It was made a lot of mistakes along the way, but it was kind of fun. So all right, Scott, Sean, I'm gonna let you get here. I'm gonna wind down this panel. Appreciate you coming in, giving us your insight to it. Hopefully we'll have many more conversations in public about this, and when it gets so that we can all be there actually answering the questions from the fans themselves of what it is that is curious to them about anything that is about to move forward. So I welcome you aboard one more time, because I couldn't have done this on my own, and I'm looking forward to all of it.
Me too, man. This has been an amazing experience. So I'm really excited. Take care. Bye.
All right, everybody. So that's picking the brains of J. Scott Campbell and Sean Lewis, the writer on King Spawn and The Scorch. But before we get going, just want to spend a couple minutes. Usually I'm up on stage and all I do is gab about sort of the things I'm doing. And I'm sure you might want to hear about some of those. So I'll spend a couple more minutes and then we'll let you all go. On the toy front, that business is continuing to grow and thrive, especially during the pandemic. For some reason, all of us geeks decided to go online because we were stuck at home. So it actually ended up working. We have a couple big announcements for a couple of big properties that we're going to be making in the next few months. So look forward to those. We're also, going to continue to expand the DC Multiverse, which is probably our biggest brand that we're doing right now. Combined with that, I'm also, besides expanding the Spawn in comic book form, I'm going to be turning a lot of those figures into plastic. So for those of you that are more into action figures, You're going to get a bigger array of Spawn figures that you can pick. And then you'll get dozens and dozens of hopefully some of your favorite DC characters on the toy front. So we'll let you know all that. On the entertainment side of things, the question that always keeps coming up is about the movie and other projects that we have on the movie front. I've been at the end of July. We will be getting the first draft of the new script. We've got some pretty big writers on that side. Hopefully we'll make an announcement of who they are. I think it'll blow you away who we've been able to sort of wrangle on this project during the pandemic. Until once we get there, I've been fielding calls almost nonstop the last 3-4 months, especially with the news of Spawn's Universe in Hollywood, who are taking, I think, much delayed interest in how to get Spawn somehow either on TV and or on the big screen. So as any of that comes out, we'll do. We announced the Sam and Twitch TV show coming out. By the time this airs, we will have hopefully another 1 or 2 entertainment headlines that will have made the airwaves. So look out for those. But we're busy, busier arguably than we've ever been in the last few years. So if you like some of the stuff that comes out of the world of Spawn and or out of my head, then stay tuned. We've got lots of it coming this way. I just want to thank everybody for their support over the years. Can't do it without you, right? So otherwise, if we don't have fans like you out there, then basically we're just self-indulging. So I hope to meet you again in person. Look forward to it. Enjoy your San Diego Con for the rest of the way. And thanks for jumping in on the panel. Everybody be good. See you soon.